Welcome, seekers of truth and wanderers of the eternal night. Today, you step into a saga unlike any other, a story whispered through ancient runes, carved in the stones of forgotten temples, and carried upon the winds of the north. This is not just a tale of gods and monsters, of heroes and doom. It is the very heartbeat of destiny itself. Before your eyes unfolds the end of an age, the final clash between divine order and chaotic destruction. Here, Odin the Allfather gathers wisdom for the last time. Thor raises his mighty hammer Mjolnir. Loki weaves treachery in the shadows, and Fenrir's jaws open wide to devour the sun. Fire and ice collide, bonds of loyalty shatter, and the echoes of prophecy thunder across the 9 realms. But this is not a story of despair alone. It is also a tale of courage, sacrifice, and rebirth. For even as the gods fall, new worlds rise. So, take your place in the circle of fire. Let your heart race with the beat of drums. Let your spirit walk among gods and giants. Welcome to Ragnarök, the end of the gods. Wetsa, the end has come. The sky splits, the earth trembles, and gods fall to ash. But in destruction lies the seed of creation. Witness the doom of the immortals and the dawn of something greater. Subscribe for more history-like, and comment if you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth. This is history. And it begins here. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft drip of water, echoing within the caverns of fate. Deep beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, 3 ancient figures sat at their loom of destiny. The Norns, Verdandi, and Skuld, wove threads of gold and shadow, each strand a life, a choice, a destiny. Their pale fingers moved with both grace and inevitability, binding past, present, and future into one unyielding tapestry. The eldest, whispered of what had been, tales of heroes long fallen, the laughter of gods, the promises of peace. Verdandi, the present, murmured of what is, the weight of suspicion, the rise of betrayal, the trembling of the 9 realms. But it was Skuld, the youngest, whose voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Her words did not simply speak. They thundered. The end is written, she declared, eyes gleaming like burning coals. The doom of gods approaches. The wolf shall break its bonds. The serpent shall rise. Fire and ice shall devour the heavens, and all that breathes shall fall to silence. Her prophecy echoed through the cavern, reaching beyond the roots of Yggdrasil, carried on winds no mortal ear could hear. It drifted through Asgard's golden halls, unsettled the dreams of gods, and stirred whispers in Jotunheim's icy wastes. Even in the depths of hail, shadows trembled at the words. Odin, the Allfather, stirred from restless sleep. His one eye, always searching, had long feared this day. In his dreams, he saw a great wolf tearing free, jaws wide enough to swallow the sun. He saw Thor, his mighty son, locked in battle with a serpent whose coils crushed the sea. He saw fire spreading from the south, devouring forests, mountains, and even the stars. Awakening, he stood in his high chamber of Valastjolf and gazed across the realms. The wind carried with it the faintest sound of the Norns' whisper, and Odin knew the prophecy was not a warning. It was a certainty. The gods, for all their power, could not escape the weaving of fate. Yet, in Odin's heart, a seed of defiance burned. If fate was a thread, then perhaps he could stretch it, knot it, twist it, even if he could not break it. And thus began the long path toward Ragnarök, the end of the gods. As the prophecy spread, fear took root. In Asgard, the gods prepared. In Jotunheim, giants sharpened their blades. In Midgard, Men felt storms churn and beasts howl in unnatural fury. The 9 realms waited, holding their breath, as destiny moved ever closer to its reckoning. And so, with a whisper, the doom of the immortals began. There was a time when Asgard rang, with laughter louder than war drums. Sunlight spilled from gilded spires, and the air itself seemed to sing. In the orchards of Idun, apples glowed with the blush of dawn, their scent drifting on warm currents that rolled across the courtyards of Valistjalf. The Edstest and the feasting fires of Bilskirnir, craftsmen shaped wonders from star metal and rune-etched oak, and skalds tuned harps to praise the deeds of gods who had, for a while, forgotten doom. Thor strode among the training fields, where the young learned to wrestle with wisdom as much as with spear and shield. Sparks leapt from Mjolnir as he brought it down, on an anvil, to split meteor iron for the smiths. Sif's hair shone like harvest light. Frigga's falcon cloak flashed as she crossed the sky, and Bragi's verses wound through the streets like a river of silver words. Even Odin, whose eye had long peered into shadow, allowed a rare softening at the corner of his mouth as he watched his people thrive. At the borders, Heimdall's ears caught only the murmurs of harmless winds, and his gaze roamed the 9 horizons untroubled. Even the roots of Yggdrasil, coiling beneath all creation, drank deep without shuddering. Peace does not last forever, but it can rest long enough to make men and gods believe that it might. In the great hall, the benches groaned under the weight of roasted boar and brimming horns. Valkyries moved between tables, their laughter quick as snowmelt, their eyes bright as stars. Loki, seated close to the fire, let stories pour from his tongue like honeyed mead, tales that made even solemn Tyr's lips twitch. Yet in his reflection on the polished rim of a horn, Loki studied a face that smiled too easily. The fire painted shifting shapes on the ceiling, and he watched them with a private hunger. A small omen passed unnoticed, a raven feather drifting against the grain of the wind. A hairline crack in a chalice no hammer had struck, the subtle dulling of an apple's sheen before Idun touched it and breathed life back into the skin. The world, generous and golden, offered 1,000 reasons to look away. When night finally quieted the feasts, Odin stood beneath the vault of stars. He traced a line from the hunter to the ship, then to the serpent encircling the sky. He remembered a whisper from roots far below. He remembered a price paid at Mimir's well. He closed his eye and listened. Beneath the music, beneath the peace, beneath the golden sheen, he heard it again, a thread drawn taut, not breaking yet, but pulled by fingers that delighted in tension. Morning would rise. Apples would be gathered. The world would remain bright. And still, in a corner of the Allfather's heart, a frost formed that sunlight could not melt. The first fracture was too fine to see, but not too quiet to hear. In the hush before dawn, words can cut deeper than blades. Loki's steps were soft as fox paws as he crossed polished stone, slipping between pillars where torchlight bent around him. He had worn 1,000 faces, guest and jester, savior and saboteur, and all of them fit as if tailored to his bones. Today he wore the face of a friend. He found Sif asleep, hair spilling like wheat over the pillow. The trick began as a playful thought. A needle prick in a tapestry. One snip, only one, and the golden cascade would tumble into silence. A jest, he told himself, a correction to a world that praised what gleamed too easily. The knife flashed once, twice. The strands fell without a cry. At dawn, Thor's oath shook the rafters. The hall filled with a silence, heavy enough to bend beams. Loki stood, hands open, apologizing with a fluency that was almost beautiful. "I will make it right," he vowed. Better than before. He ran to the dwarves, master smiths beneath mountains, where sparks bloomed like stars in caves that never saw the sun. He bartered and lied with equal craft, wringing from them not only a crown of living gold for Sif, but gifts that would shape destinies, Skivlethanir, Gungnir, and, almost as an afterthought, another marvel meant to tempt and tangle. When Loki returned, Sif's new hair flowed like sunlight poured from a ewer. Thor's fury dimmed, though not forgotten. The gifts brought gasps and applause, but Odin's fingers tightened around Gungnir's shaft as if it had arrived already blooded. Perfection, Odin knew, is bait. That night, Loki poured mead for the gods with careful hands. He listened more than he spoke. Words drifted like embers. Why does Odin keep secrets even from his own blood? Why does Thor strike before asking? Is Freyja's counsel given freely or bought? Freyja's counsel given freely or bought? He did not accuse. He only wondered aloud, and left the wondering to grow like vines around the pillars of trust. In private, he stared at his reflection in a basin. The water shivered with a vision, a ship made of nails, a wolf breaking bonds, a serpent rearing from black waves. His mouth curved, not in joy, but in relief. Destiny had finally found a conspirator who would not pretend to be innocent. At the next feast, laughter rang again. The crown gleamed on Sif's head. The gifts were praised. The crack, however, had widened, not yet visible, but underfoot. A hairline seam waited for a heel to fall. They raised the wolf in Asgard, because they feared what he would become without their watch. He grew faster than seasons turn, paws like anvils, breath like winter. Fenrir learned the sense of every god, and the measure of every step along the gardens and training fields. When he yawned, the guards looked away. When he laughed, if such a sound can be called laughter, sparrows scattered from the eaves. A challenge was proposed as a game. "Let us test your strength," the gods said, "so all may praise your might." They brought chains worthy of giants, forged with thunder and thunder's echo. Fenrir let them bind him, and with a shake, shattered the links into glittering dust. The gods laughed. Fenrir laughed louder. They brought a second chain, thicker, runes hammered deep into its iron. Fenrir flexed, muscles rippling like storm surf, and the chain screamed apart. The laughter faltered. Then came Gleipnir, soft as ribbon and thin as dawn's first wind, woven by dwarves from the footfall of a cat, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the spit of a bird, and the sound of a heartbeat. Things that could not be, and therefore could bind what should not be bound. Fenrir eyed the silken band, suspicion rising like hackles. "If this is a game," he growled, "then one of you must place a hand in my mouth. So I know you deal honestly." Only Tyr stepped forward. He had fed the wolf when others kept their distance. He had met those amber eyes without flinching. He had offered not mercy, but fairness. He did so now, jaw set, as he laid his hand between teeth like scythes. Gleipnir slid around the wolf's limbs with a whisper. Fenrir strained, and the world strained with him. Grass tore in clumps, stones cracked, the air itself squealed. Gleipnir held. A hush fell that was not victory, but the absence of breath. Fenrir turned his gaze to Tyr. In it, the deep lore of bargains burned. The wolf closed his jaw. Tyr's cry was brief, swallowed by the sky. Blood darkened the grass, and silence became a judgment. The gods hammered a chain to a boulder and drove it into the earth. Fenrir howled, a sound that bent birds from their courses and soured milk in their pails. Spittle foamed at his jaws. They thrust a sword into his mouth to hold it open, and the froth ran in rivers. Tyr stood apart, one hand gone, the other clenched white at his side. He did not look away. Odin watched, knowing the wolf's breaking would someday break him. Loki watched, eyes veiled. Somewhere far below, the roots of Yggdrasil twitched, as if something sleeping had turned over. Far out on a black sea, the moon traced a thin scar across the water. Beneath, scales rasped against ages. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, slept with its tail clenched in its own jaws, encircling Midgard like a belt of storm iron. But sleep is never perfect. Dreams pass through even the oldest things, and the serpent began to dream of sky. Whalers from frostbitten shores felt it first, a groan rising through the hull, a tone too deep for human throats. Nets came up empty, then came up torn, then did not come up at all. On the beaches, children stacked stones in serpent shapes without knowing why. In Thor's bones, a pressure built like distant thunder pushing against the ribs. 2. The god of thunder took a cloak and walked among fishermen dressed as one of them, taking mead from rough hands and stories from rough mouths. He borrowed a skiff and rowed into the ink. The sea breathed slow, a lung the size of a world. Thor baited a line with an ox's head and let it sink. The rope thrummed a string on a giant's harp. He set his feet. The boards creaked. Something took the bait with the calm certainty of a thing that has never not been hungry. The line hauled down as if the ocean had turned upside down and decided to steal the sky. Thor braced, muscles knotting like roots finding stone. A shape rose. A hill. A mountain. A horizon rolling toward him. The serpent's head broke the surface, eyes like drowned suns opening, water shedding in sheets. The hiss of that first breath scalded the fog. Thor lifted his hammer and the world flinched. Then a shadow passed over the boat. Hymir's fear, Loki's grin, a distant gull's cry. Pick your version. The line snapped, or the knot slipped, or a wave took pity. The serpent sank not in defeat, but with the patient contempt of a cat that has learned a mouse's hiding place. It did not flee. It merely waited. Back on shore, Thor stood with wet hair and a temper like a storm front. He stared at the horizon, as if squinting could turn distance into courage. He knew that some battles do not start at the first swing. Some begin with the first shared breath. Under the sea, Jörmungandr coiled tighter. The pressure sang along trenches and vents. Whales changed their routes. Seabirds tilted in mid-air. In a fjord, ice cracked with no visible cause. In Asgard, a goblet trembled. In Hell, a ripple shivered across stagnant water. No message traveled, and yet every place received one. When the tide finally turned, it did so with a weight that made cliffs groan. The serpent's tail loosened by the smallest fraction. The world did not end. It shifted. Baldr, brightest of the gods, was the laughter in Asgard's heart. His presence lit every hall. His fairness soothed quarrels, and his dreams were mirrors of peace, until they turned to nightmares. Each night he saw shadows clawing at the sun, fire devouring forests, and his own lifeless body lying pale beneath the branches of Yggdrasil. Odin, burdened by prophecy, feared these visions. Frigg, Baldra's mother, wept and swore that her son would never fall. She roamed the 9 realms, extracting promises from every stone, tree, beast, and flame. None would harm Baldur. Even iron, fire, and venom bent to her plea. So, only one thing she overlooked: the mistletoe, too young and too slight to be sworn. With this flaw, Loki's cunning found a seed of ruin. He shaped a dart of mistletoe and slipped it into the hands of Huther, Baldur's blind brother. In the games of Asgard, gods hurled spears and stones at Baldr, laughing as each fell harmlessly aside. Loki guided Huther's hand. The dart flew silent. It struck Baldur's chest. The god of light fell lifeless, laughter silenced forever. Asgard froze. Frigg's cry pierced heavens. Odin's ravens wheeled in terror. and Thor's roar split the skies. No jest had ever sounded so cruel. Baldra's death cracked the first pillar of the god's immortality. Grief sharpened Odin's hunger for knowledge. Baldra's death had proven prophecy could not be denied. It could only be prepared for. Leaving Asgard's golden halls, Odin rode Sleipnir into shadow, descending to the realm of Hel. For once, Hel, through caverns of frost and rivers of poison he traveled, seeking the seeress whose eyes had seen beyond death. She rose from her grave at his command, pale and trembling, and her voice croaked the truth. Baldr would not return until the world was remade. Ragnarök had already begun. But Odin sought more. He bent once again to Mimir's well, the fount of wisdom hidden beneath Yggdrasil. There he whispered questions, and received silence in return. Only when he gouged himself deeper with sacrifice did the water ripple with visions, wolves devouring the sun, the serpent rising, and his own end at the jaws of Fenrir. He returned to Asgard, bearing not hope, but grim resolve. If doom could not be prevented, it must at least be faced with eyes open. As grief spread, so too did weakness. Ithun's orchard, keeper of the golden apples that sustain the gods, grew strangely dim. Leaves dulled, blossoms wilted, and the apples shrank. No feast restored vigor, as it once had. Threthda's strikes grew slower. Freyja's steps faltered in her falcon cloak. Even Odin's shoulders sagged. The Aesir whispered uneasily. Were the apples losing their power, or was fate itself leeching strength from the fruit? Ithnun wept over her trees, her hands trembling as golden skins dulled beneath her touch. Loki lingered nearby, smiling with no reason. For he knew that immortality was not eternal. It was only borrowed, and destiny was here to collect. The gods saged for the first time in memory. Beards silvered, hands stiffened, eyes dimmed. The twilight of their vigor heralded the twilight of the world. On the edge of Bifrost stood Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of gods and realms. His eyes saw further than horizons. His ears caught grass sprouting, wool growing, hearts trembling. For eons he had watched, and now the silence broke. The earth shuddered. The sea hissed. The air tore, as though claws raked the sky. Heimdall raised Gjallarhorn, the great horn of fate, and pressed it to his lips. Its sound was no sound, but the very shattering of silence. Deep, rolling, irresistible. It rang across all 9 realms, waking warriors, stirring giants, shaking Hel's gates. In Asgard, the gods dropped their cups and seized their weapons. In Jotunheim, giants howled in triumph. In Muspelheim, flames leapt higher as Surtur raised his sword. Even in Midgard, mortals felt their bones vibrate, and knew without knowing that the end had begun. Gjallarhorn had sounded. Ragnarök had started. Above the realms, the wolves Skirl and Hati had chased the sun and moon, since time's first dawn. For ages the chase had given rhythm to day and night. Always near, never complete. But fate had sharpened their hunger. At Gjallarhorn's call, the wolves leapt. Skirl's jaws closed around the blazing chariot of the sun. Fire flared, then smothered in darkness. Hati swallowed the pale disk of the moon, plunging the world into endless night. The stars dimmed, swallowed not by shadow, but by silence. The 9 realms groaned. Mortals lit desperate torches, but their flames sputtered in wind that carried the stink of doom. In Asgard, the gods stared into the void above, their courage cracking. Odin clenched his spear. Thor's knuckles whitened on Mjolnir. Loki, face lit by the fading embers, smiled. The age of light was over. Ragnarök marched on beneath a sky of black. Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, had always gleamed like a river of crystal fire. arched between Midgard and Asgard, shimmering with the colors of dawn. Forged from light itself, it was unshakable, unbreakable, a pathway for gods to cross between realms. Yet even light bends and shatters when the weight of doom presses upon it. When Gjallarhorn's echo faded into silence, the first tremors rippled through the bridge. Heimdall, vigilant guardian, felt it beneath his feet, his golden eyes narrowed. He had stood watch for centuries, yet never before had Bifrost trembled. Across the span he saw the storm of Ragnarök rising, giants surging from Jotunheim, flames swelling from Muspelheim, shadows crawling from hell, and in their wake a tide of chaos, greater than even gods could measure. Heimdall planted Gjallarhorn in the bridge's surface, a pillar against ruin. "Stand until I fall," he swore. His voice rolled across the arcs of light, yet destiny would not be denied. The sky blackened, flames licked at the base of the arch, and the thunder of Jörmungandr's coils rising from dark. The sea sent cracks running like veins of shadow through the prism. But even spears cannot hold back fate. Lightning tore across the heavens, and with a final cry the bridge splintered. Light screamed as it fell, shards dissolving into sparks and rainbows, extinguished in the void. Heimdall staggered but did not fall. He stepped back, the last guardian teeth bared, waiting for the flood of enemies that would now march unimpeded toward Asgard's gates. And so Bifrost, once the symbol of unity and passage, lay shattered, a bridge undone, a promise broken, a warning fulfilled. The gods could no longer keep the realms apart. All would now clash together, and the 9 worlds would burn as one. From the depths of Muspelheim, where mountains are made of fire and rivers flow molten with eternal flame, a giant stirred. Searcher, the Fire King, the firstborn of chaos, rose from his throne of ash. His eyes glowed with the fury of suns. His beard burned like coals in a forge, and in his hands he carried a sword brighter than 1,000 dawns. This was the blade that would end worlds, the firebrand destined to set the cosmos aflame. When Gjallarhorn's echo reached the smouldering fields of Muspelheim, the fire legions answered. Flames leapt higher than peaks. Seas of lava burst their banks. Surtur stood and raised his sword, and the horizon split. His voice rolled like a furnace. The time has come. Let the realms burn. With each step, mountains crumbled. Ash fell across the 9 realms like black snow. In Midgard, mortals fled as skies reddened and fields ignited. In Asgard, the gods saw the heavens glowing crimson as if the sun itself bled. Odin knew the prophecy. Surtur would strike the final blow, burning Yggdrasil, ending all creation. The thought was a weight heavy, even for the Allfather. Giants of flame surged behind their lord, armies clad in molten armor, their spears dripping spark that turned air to fire. They marched across the broken Bifrost, no longer a bridge of light, but a trail of cinders. Heimdall's watchful eyes narrowed, but even he could not bar their advance alone. Thoth gripped Mjolnir tighter. The Thunder God's veins burned with impatience. But Odin raised his hand. Not yet. Each must meet their foe in time. The Allfather's gaze was fixed not on Surtur's host, but on the sword of twilight. Its blaze licked at the sky, promising not just battle, but the end of all things. Meanwhile, Surtur's laughter shook the 9 realms. He had waited since the birth of fire itself for this hour. He would not be denied. Forests ignited as his breath passed over them. Oceans boiled where sparks fell. The serpent beneath the waves stirred faster, coils thrashing in heated waters. The wolf Fenrir howled against his chains. The dead in Hel began their march, guided by the fire in the sky. Surtur raised his blade high, and its light eclipsed the stars. "Burn until nothing remains," he declared. His host roared, and Muspelheim spilled like a flood of flame into the realms of gods and men. The march of Surtur had begun, and with it, the promise of the world's final fire far out upon the restless sea, where waves gnawed at cliffs and storm winds clawed the horizon. A shadow stirred. It was no ordinary ship that rose from the black swells. It was Naglfar, the vessel foretold to bear the dead to war. No oak, no iron, no stone shaped its frame. Its timbers were fingernails and toenails, torn from the corpses of men, gathered across centuries in hell's silent halls. Each nail was a prayer unanswered, each plank a body never buried. When the sun and moon were devoured, when the horn of Heimdall sounded, the ship's moorings broke. Chains snapped, anchors shattered, and Naglfar heaved free from its harbor of death. Its sails were stitched from funeral shrouds, black and heavy with sorrow, yet filled by winds of wrath. At the prow stood Loki, his eyes alight with triumph, freed from his bonds at last. He lifted his hands to the storm and laughed. His children stirred across the realms. Fenrir howled. Jörmungandr thrashed. Hell opened her gates. Now Loki would lead the dead against the living, the forsaken against the arrogant. Behind him, row upon row of corpses filled the benches, warriors long forgotten, kings dethroned, thralls abandoned. Their hollow eyes gleamed like embers, their weapons rusted but ready. Among them sat giants drowned in old floods, champions cut down by gods themselves, and traitors who spat on their oaths. Now they rode as one, guided by vengeance. The sea frothed black around the ship. Leviathans rose, then sank again, unwilling to touch its cursed hull. Storms bent before it. The ship's creaking was not of timber, but of bone-grinding bone. Its figurehead was a skull, jaw agape, as if swallowing the wind. In Asgard, Odin saw the shadow growing on the horizon. His ravens circled, wings stiff, cawing warnings that carried no comfort. "Naglfar has come," he whispered. Thor gritted his teeth. Even the fearless god felt a shiver when he thought of that ship and its master. On Naglfar's deck, Loki spread his arms. "The realms mocked me. The gods bound me. Now I bring them their end." His voice rang across the waters, carried by thunder, answered by silence. He gripped the helm, eyes fixed on Vigrid, the plain where fate would be written in blood. And so the ship of nails sailed forth, unstoppable, unsinkable, a vessel not of wood and rope, but of inevitability. The dead did not tire. The waves could not drown them, and the horizon burned with the fire of Surtur's march, guiding them to war. Gore! The armies of the end were gathering in the deepest pit of Niflheim, where frost clung to shadows, and the air was thick with despair. A gate groaned. Its hinges were carved from bone, its bars from ice blacker than night. Behind it stirred the legions of Hel, ruler of the dead. Hel, daughter of Loki, half beautiful and half decayed, rose from her throne of corpses. Her eyes were as cold as the void, her smile neither cruel nor kind, merely inevitable. She had waited in silence, biding time, as her father schemed above. Now the call of Ragnarök reached even here, and her hand lifted, pale and commanding. The gate opened, out they marched, the army of the forgotten, warriors slain in nameless battles, mothers who died in childbirth, children taken by plague. One day then, kings buried, with no songs to follow them. Not the glorious dead who feasted in Valhalla, but the abandoned souls, neglected by honor. Their numbers were endless, their sorrow unspent. Frost clung to their weapons, rust dripped from their blades, but their eyes burned with a hunger that life had denied. With each step, the 9 realms grew colder. Torches sputtered out, rivers froze midstream. Even Surtra's advancing fire hissed as it met the touch of Hell's march. At their front, Hel raised her hand, and silence fell across the army. Her voice carried like a whisper that shook mountains. Rise, and claim what was stolen from you. The gods who scorned you, the halls that rejected you, they shall fall, their fire shall freeze, their power shall crumble. And from their ruin the forgotten shall rule. Behind her, banners of shadow unfurled, stitched from funeral wrappings, marked with runes of grief. Wolves of ice prowled among the ranks, their breath turning air to shards. Giants who had died in exile rose again, their wounds still gaping, their eyes vacant but obedient. From the sea came Naglfar, black sails looming, and Hell's forces joined Loki's on its deck, the ship groaning under the weight of despair. Loki welcomed them with open arms, bowing to his daughter, whose cold presence even he dared not mock. In Asgard, the gods felt the chill seep into their halls. Frost rimed the edges of their golden shields. Odin's breath smoked as if in winter. The Allfather knew this was the balance to Surtra's flame. Fire would consume, frost would choke, and between them, nothing would endure. Hel looked once toward the heavens, her half-rotted face unreadable. Then she turned back to her legions. Forward, the ground cracked under their march. The dead walked again, and the living trembled. The plain of Vigrid stretched endlessly, a barren wasteland where nothing grew. No bird sang, no stream ran. Its soil was black ash, its horizon a trembling mirage. It had always been empty, waiting only for this, the last battlefield of gods and giants, of fire and frost, of the living and the dead. One by one the armies arrived. From the south, the earth shook beneath the march of Surtr and his fire giants. Their armor glowed red-hot, their swords spat sparks, their very footsteps scorched the ground. At their head burned the sword of twilight, its flame visible across all 9 realms. From the north, the air froze with the arrival of Hel and her legions of the dead. Their banners of shadow blotted out the sky. Each soul's eyes glowed with grief and rage, their rusted blades clattering like bones. Wolves of ice prowled among them, howling as their breath turned air into shards. Across the sea rolled Naglfar, the ship of nails, its cursed hull scraped onto Vigrid's shore, spilling forth Loki and his monstrous crew. Beside him marched his children, Fenrir, snarling, eyes molten with hate, chains still dangling from his limbs, and Jörmungandr, the serpent, uncoiling from the sea, its massive body, circling the plain like a living wall. And then came Asgard. The gods, clad in gleaming but fading armor, descended with fury. Odin, one eye burning with defiance, rode Sleipnir at the head of the host, ravens screaming overhead. Thor walked beside him, Mjolnir crackling in his grip, every step shaking the plain. Tyr, one hand clenched around his sword, strode with grim determination. Freyr, weaponless save for his courage, stood ready. Heimdall lifted Gjallarhorn once more, his gaze locked on Loki. The air itself trembled, fire roared, frost crackled, lightning struck. Death waited. Odin raised Gungnir, his spear gleaming like a star. His voice thundered across Vigrid Kite. Today, fate is fulfilled. Let gods and giants fall together. Let the world burn, let the world drown, but let us meet our doom as warriors. The armies roared as one. Though their cries were not united, they clashed in sound as they would clash in blood. Fenrir howled, shaking the skies. Jörmungandr's hiss drowned the sea. Surtra's laughter was thunder. Hel's whisper cut like knives. Loki's smile shone with triumph. And the gods' war cries answered them all. The sky split open, the ground quaked, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. The battlefield shook as the gods and giants collided. But Odin's gaze was fixed only on one beast. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, tore free from the last shreds of Gleipnir, chains clattering like broken thunder. His jaws stretched wide enough to swallow the sky, fangs glistening with venom and blood. Odin spurred Sleipnir forward, Gungnir gleaming in his hand. He had always known this was his fate, foretold since the wolf's first howl, inevitable. As the turning of the Norns loom, yet he rode not in fear but in defiance. "Come, beast!" Odin roared, and his voice shook the plain. Fenrir's growl was the sound of mountains splitting. He lunged, each step collapsing ground beneath him. Odin hurled Gungnir, the spear flying like lightning, striking deep into the wolf's hide. Fenrir snarled, snapping the shaft in his teeth, blood steaming on his tongue. Sleipnir galloped, hooves pounding like thunder, weaving between claws the size of tree trunks. Odin struck again and again, runes blazing on his spear. Yet for every blow, Fenrir's rage only grew. Then came the inevitable. The wolf lunged, jaws unhinging, wider than a hall. Odin raised Gungnir for one last strike, but Fenrir swallowed him whole. The sky dimmed, the gods' cries faltered. The Allfather was gone. But prophecy did not end here. In the shadows of Fenrir's victory, Vidharther, Odin's silent son, stepped forward. Without words, he braced his foot in the wolf's jaws, gripping with divine strength. With his other hand, he thrust a sword upward, tearing into Fenrir's throat. The beast writhed, choking on blood and fury. Father and son's destinies entwined. Odin devoured, Fenrir slain. The cycle spun on. From the sea, a mountain of scales rose, water cascading from its coils. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, encircled the battlefield, eyes glowing like twin suns drowned in venom. His hiss drowned thunder, his breath poisoned the wind. Thor's heart surged with battle joy. At last the foe he had awaited all his life. Raising Mjolnir, he shouted, "Come forth, serpent! Let the sky shake with our clash." The serpent struck first, its head crashing down like a falling cliff. Thor leapt, hammer raised, meeting the strike with thunder. Lightning shattered the plain, burning giant and god alike. The serpent recoiled, but only for a moment. Its coils tightened around Thor, squeezing mountains into dust, venom pouring like rivers. Threthter roared, muscles straining, lightning bursting from his veins. He swung Mjolnir with all his might, blow after blow cracking bone, splitting scales. Each strike echoed across the 9 realms. At last, with a scream that split heavens, Thor crushed Jörmungandr's skull. The serpent's body convulsed, thrashing into the sea. Waves drowning Midgard. The god of thunder staggered, triumphant, but poisoned. Venom seeped through his veins, blackening his skin, searing his lungs. He took 9 steps, each a quake upon Vigrid. Then he fell, lifeless beside his enemy. Threthter and Jörmungandr, destroyer and destroyed, lay entwined in death. At the heart of the plain burned Surtr, his flaming sword a second sun. He towered above gods and giants alike, each sweep of his blade scorching the sky. Against him stepped Freyr, lord of harvests, giver of peace, once the brightest of Vanir. But he had given away his sword long ago for love, and so he faced the fire giant with nothing but courage. Freyr's armor gleamed like summer fields, his shield etched with runes of growth and plenty. In his hand he held only a stag's antler, carved into a weapon of desperation. Yet he did not falter. "Surtr," he cried, "flame cannot grow without what I have given. Let us see if fire can consume the harvest without choking." They clashed. Flame against flesh, fire against antler. Fenrir struck swift and sure, his blows landing like rain upon a drought-stricken field. For a moment, hope shone. His courage burned as bright as Surtra's fire, and even the giant stumbled. But prophecy had spoken. Freyr, without his sword, could not win. Surtra's blade came down, cleaving shield, armor, and body in a single stroke. Freyr fell, his light extinguished, his fields burned. Surtra laughed, raising his sword high. The sword of twilight burned hotter, ready for its final strike against the world itself, amid the chaos of Vigrid, where flame and frost clashed in endless ruin. A howl rose, deep, tearing, filled with hunger. From the gates of hell bounded Garm, the hound of the underworld. His eyes burned like coals in ice, his chest broad as a tower, his fangs dripping blood. He was the guardian of hell's domain, loosed now to rend the living. Across the plain stepped Tyr, the god of war and justice. One hand gone, the price he had paid to bind Fenrir. His empty sleeve fluttered in the storm wind. But in his remaining hand he held his sword, runes carved into the steel, with steady purpose. Tyr had always known he was destined for this beast. "Come, hound." Tyr spoke calmly. "Let us settle the oath I swore with my hand." Garm leapt, jaws snapping wide enough to crush a shield wall. Tyr met the strike with a swing, blade ringing as it carved furrows in the beast's hide. The hound howled, claws gouging trenches in the earth. They circled, each strike a hammer against fate itself, divine steel against monstrous fang. Okanged. But the victory was brief. Even as the hound collapsed, its fangs sank into Tyr's side, piercing his body. The god of justice fell beside his foe, his blood mingling with the beast's. Both warrior and guardian lay still, bound in death as they had been in fate. Through storm and shadow, the watchman of the gods faced the trickster. Heimdall, ever vigilant, stood with Gjallarhorn still warm at his lips, sword gleaming like dawn. Across from him, Loki, freed from bonds and crowned in chaos, smiled with cruel delight. They had always been destined for this. Watcher and schemer, order and mischief, brothers in blood, enemies in fate. Do you hear it, Heimdall? Loki taunted, gesturing to the chaos around them. The end sings, and I am its melody. Heimdall's gaze was steady. Then I am its silence. They charged. Loki's daggers flashed, weaving in tricks and feints, illusions blooming like fireflies. Heimdall cut through them with ruthless clarity, his sword guided by the sight that pierced every veil. Steel rang on steel, sparks spraying their movements faster than mortal eyes could follow. Blood stained the plain. Heimdall whispered, "The end watches you as I did." Loki grinned through pain, then let it laugh. They fell together, watcher and trickster, silence and chaos bound in death. The golden spires of Asgard, once radiant as dawn, now burned red beneath the storm of Ragnarök. The great halls trembled, their walls cracking as fire and frost clashed in endless ruin. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of battle, the clang of steel, the thunder of Mjolnir's last echoes fading into silence. Odin ceased, but the Shays pretentesis. Odin was gone, Thor lay fallen, Tyr, Freyr, Heimdall, all had met their destinies. The defenders of Asgard dwindled with each passing heartbeat. Still they fought, shields raised, voices hoarse, for no god yields willingly even to fate. Above, Surtra's flames spread like wings of ruin, raining fire upon roofs that had once shone with gold. The rainbow shimmer of Velasjálf's dome cracked apart, shards of light falling like dying stars. Yggdrasil's branches, reaching high over the city, groaned as sparks caught in its leaves. The Valkyries, those fierce daughters of battle, swooped through smoke, guiding the last of the worthy fallen toward Valhalla, though its doors themselves shook. Their cries were fierce but mournful, wings tipped with ash. In the heart of the city, Frigg knelt where Baldur once had walked, her hands stained with ash, her tears falling upon broken stones. Beside her, Freyja raised her falcon cloak, its feathers singed, her voice rising in battle song, even as her heart cracked with grief. The armies of the giants surged through shattered gates, trampling halls where feasts once rang with laughter. Their war cries drowned the songs of schools, replacing them with thunder and ruin. Atop Hlidskjalf, Odin's high seat, the ravens Hugin and Munin circled, cawing frantically. Their master was gone, yet they remained, witnesses to the end. They watched as flames consumed the last banners of the Aesir, as statues toppled, as golden walls melted into rivers of molten ruin. Asgard, the shining realm, the crown of the 9 worlds, fell into fire. Its collapse was not sudden, but slow, agonizing, as if the cosmos itself could not bear to part with its glory. But destiny had spoken. The age of the gods was over, and in the silence that followed the last scream, only fire remained. Far below, the mortal world trembled as the war of gods shook the heavens. From the sea rose the corpse of Jörmungandr, slain by Thor but still coiling in death, its body rived, its coils thrashing with such fury that the oceans rose like mountains. Waves swallowed coasts, dragging villages whole into the abyss. Ships splintered like toys, forests drowned, and plains became seas. Mortals clung to rooftops, to trees, to fragments of wood, their cries lost in the roar of the flood. The horizon vanished, replaced by endless water blackened with venom. The sky, already dark from Skjöll and Hati's feast of sun and moon, turned heavier still. Clouds burst with lightning, as if the heavens themselves wept. Rain poured, mingling with venomous seas until rivers overflowed, washing away the last traces of Midgard's green. Amid the chaos, 2 small figures hid deep within the branches of Yggdrasil, Lif and Lifthrasir, a man and a woman, huddled together in fear but also in faith. The Norns had whispered that they would survive, and in their survival the world would begin anew. For now, though, they trembled as oceans thundered below, unseen by the chaos of gods and giants. On the battlefield of Vigrid, the flood reached even there. Giants drowned beside fallen gods. Undead soldiers sank into whirlpools. Fire hissed as water met flame. The balance of destruction was complete. Surtra's fire above, Jörmungandr's flood below, both devouring what remained of the 9 worlds. In the villages of mortals, mothers clutched their children as tides swallowed homes. Warriors who once prayed to Odin or Thor lifted their swords against waves. They could not slay. Temples crumbled, altars vanished, and with them the last prayers of mankind sank into the sea. At last, Midgard itself was no longer a land but a memory, drowned beneath endless waters, poisoned by serpent's blood. The world of men was gone, erased by the writhing corpse of a god's foe. But in Yggdrasil's shelter, 2 seeds of hope endured. Trembling but alive, the flood receded not into calm, but into nothingness. Fire hissed, waters churned, mountains split, and then the sounds of war dwindled. On the plain of Vigrid, where gods and giants had clashed, silence fell. The heroes lay scattered. Thor, lifeless beside Jörmungandr. Odin gone into Fenrir's maw. Freyr in ash, Tyr in blood, Heimdall and Loki entwined in death. Giants burned, their bones charred black. The dead of hell sank into mire. The battlefield, once roaring with clash and cry, became a grave. Above, the sky was dark. No sun, no moon, no stars. Smoke veiled all light. Ash fell like snow, and the wind carried only the stink of ruin. Yggdrasil itself groaned, its branches blackened, leaves shriveling, roots bleeding sap like wounds. Surtra still stood, towering in the hush, his blade glowing like a sun in a world that had lost all suns. But even his laughter had ended, for in this moment he was not victor, he was executioner waiting for the last stroke. Across the 9 realms, silence stretched. No song in Alfheim, no hammer in Svartalfheim, no laughter in Midgard, no hunting cry in Jotunheim. Even the halls of Valhalla lay empty, their benches overturned, their fires cold. The 9 worlds had become a single thing, void. The Norns paused at their loom, hands still, threads cut. They gazed upon what had been woven and did not speak, for there was nothing more to say. The silence was not peace, it was the weight of endings. A breath held before the final fire. A void stretched wide enough to swallow memory itself. Then, slowly, the silence cracked, the groan of Yggdrasil's trunk, the faint rumble of flame. Surtra raised his sword. The last act was near. Silence covered the 9 realms like a shroud, broken only by the crackle of a single flame. At the center of Vigrid, the last figure still standing was Surtra, the Fire King. His colossal form rose above corpses and ash. His sword, the sword of twilight, blazing brighter than any sun. He raised it high, and its fire devoured the sky. Smoke curled into rivers of red, clouds melted, and the firmament itself seemed to burn. Surtra's eyes glowed like molten stone as he looked upon the ruin. Gods fallen, giants slain, mortals drowned. He had not won this war. He had ended it. Then, with a roar that shook what little remained of the heavens, Surtra swung the blade. The stroke split air and earth alike. Fire spread in waves, racing faster than storms, consuming forests, mountains, and seas. Even Jörmungandr's corpse sizzled into vapor, its venom boiled away by flame. Fenrir's body, still steaming with Odin's blood, turned to ash. The dead armies burned again, their second death final. Asgard's ruins were engulfed, golden halls melting into rivers of molten ore. Jotunheim's glaciers hissed and vanished, steam rising like dying breaths. Midgard's waves boiled. The flood itself aflame, water turned to fire. And through it all, Surtra stood unmoved, the executioner of creation. The fire rose higher, licking the branches of Yggdrasil. The world tree trembled, its leaves curling into ash, its bark cracking into embers. Its roots, which bound all 9 realms together, began to glow as the inferno reached into their depths. For a moment, the entire cosmos was fire, nothing but flame, swallowing all memory of gods and men. And still Surtra roared, each swing of his sword another strike against existence itself. The inferno had come. The 9 worlds burned. Ragnarök reached its terrible climax. The world tree, Yggdrasil, had endured since the first dawn, its roots binding the realms, its branches touching heaven and beyond. Every leaf was a song, every root a law, every branch a promise. But now its hour had come. Surtra's fire licked at its base, and the tree groaned like a dying god. The sound echoed across void and flame, a deep creaking that shook even Surtra's armies of ash. Sparks raced up its trunk, turning bark to coal, branches to torches. In Asgard, flames climbed the boughs, where Valkyries once flew. In Midgard, the roots that nourished mortal life blackened and cracked. In Jotunheim, frost turned to steam as fire raced upward. Even in Hell, shadows recoiled as the roots split apart. The animals of Yggdrasil screamed. Retoskr, the squirrel who carried insults between eagle and serpent, fled the burning bark, fur singed, tail aflame. Nithhogr, the dragon gnawing at its roots, writhed in fire. wings snapping as flames consumed its scales. Even the eagle perched at its highest branch shrieked once, before falling in a storm of sparks. The Norns sat at the well of Erd, their loom broken, their threads burned. They did not weep. Their task was finished. They simply watched as the fabric of existence unraveled. Above, branches cracked and fell, each crashing like a world's death. The tree's crown, once green with eternity, blazed white-hot before collapsing into nothing. Roots split open, releasing rivers of sap that ignited into rivers of flame. As Yggdrasil burned, the realms tethered to it collapsed. The pathways between worlds dissolved, leaving only smoke. The structure of the cosmos, carefully balanced across ages, crumbled like dry leaves in the wind. And yet, from deep within its roots, two figures clung together. Lif and Lifthrasir, trembling, felt the flames pass around them but not consume them. The prophecy shielded them. Though they heard every groan of the dying tree, they alone bore witness to the fall of the great ash. At last, with a roar like the ending of time itself, Yggdrasil collapsed. Its trunk split in two, falling into Surtur's inferno, vanishing in a blaze so bright that for a heartbeat, the void was blinding. When the light dimmed, there was no tree, no roots, no branches, only fire, ash, and silence. The pillar of creation was gone. The world tree was dead. When Yggdrasil fell, the heavens broke with it. The stars that had once wheeled across the night sky, guiding sailors, marking seasons, watching over lovers and warriors alike, flickered, then vanished. One by one, their lights dimmed, swallowed by the smoke of Surtur's inferno. The sun was gone, the moon devoured, and now even the stars dissolved. The sky itself became a ceiling of ash, heavy and oppressive, pressing down upon the ruins of the 9 realms. No color remained, only gray and red, fire and soot. The gods were fallen, the giants slain, mortals drowned, and now the sky gave up its last. The cosmos itself seemed ashamed of survival, choosing instead to collapse into the same silence that smothered every battlefield. The winds did not blow. The rivers did not flow. Even Surtur's flames seemed muted now, glowing dull in the suffocating shroud. The sword of twilight, once radiant, sputtered under the weight of smoke, for fire cannot burn without air, and even the air had begun to die. A silence greater than death spread across the void. It was the silence of unmaking. The loom of the Norns lay charred, its threads cut. The 9 realms, once bound by Yggdrasil, were ash drifting in emptiness. And yet, within that silence, faint echoes lingered. The memory of laughter in Asgard's halls, the crash of Mjolnir against Jörmungandr's skull, the tears of Frigg, the whispers of Loki, echoes only, unheard by any living ear, but woven into the ash like faint runes refusing to fade. The sky bent lower. The horizon disappeared. The universe seemed to fold into itself, leaving only a husk of smoke. Surtur raised his sword one final time, not in triumph, but in weary duty. With a final swing, he extinguished the last spark of light. The sky turned to ash. The 9 realms ceased to be. Amid the ruin, amid the ash, amid silence so deep it seemed eternal, life stirred, hidden within the roots of Yggdrasil, spared from flame and flood. 2 mortals clung to each other, Lif and Lifthrasir. Their bodies trembled, but their hearts endured. The prophecy had spoken of them. When all was gone, they would remain. For days, or perhaps ages, time had lost meaning. They huddled in darkness. Around them, ash drifted like snow. No sound reached their ears, but the faint beating of their own hearts. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, yet still they endured, nourished by the dew of the tree's hidden roots, protected by fate. When at last the fire waned and the sky cleared, they stepped forth. The world they beheld was unrecognizable. No halls, no cities, no fields, no mountains, only ash, charred soil, and a horizon trembling with the faintest light. But there, breaking through the void, was a new dawn. The air was fresh, cool against their faces. The first bird song since the end whispered in the distance. A green shoot pierced through blackened earth, trembling but alive. Life, fragile and small, had survived the end of gods. Lif and Lifthrasir clasped hands. Their voices shook, but hope carried them. Right, we live, so the world shall live again. From them would come new generations. From them a new Midgard would rise. They were no gods, no giants, no warriors, only mortals. And yet, it was they, not the immortals, who carried the seed of tomorrow. Above them, the sky, though grey, no longer pressed with ash. A pale light crept across the horizon, a promise that the circle of life had not ended, but turned. The ashes of Ragnarök would be soil, and from that soil a new age would bloom. And though the gods had fallen, their memory lingered in the veins of the world, in the stories that would be told anew by those who lived. The survivors walked forward, leaving footprints in ash that would one day be grass. The thunder had fallen silent when Thor died beside Jörmungandr. Yet his legacy did not perish. In the age after Ragnarök, when the fires waned and the floods withdrew, two figures stepped from shadow into the pale light of the new dawn, Magni and Molthi, sons of Thor. The brothers were not gods as their father had been. They were the survivors of his blood, the inheritors of his spirit. Their frames were strong, their eyes bright with fire unquenched by the end. In their hands they carried a weight heavier than any armor, the hope of their father's might. Upon the battlefield of ash they found it, Mjolnir, the hammer of thunder, lying cracked but unbroken. Its surface bore scars from battles untold, its runes dimmed. But within it still slept the storm. The sons of Thor approached with reverence. Together they lifted the weapon, its weight bending their arms, its power humming like a heart refusing to die. Lightning whispered from its head, faint but alive. The storm was not gone. It had only slumbered, waiting for hands worthy to wield it. Magni raised it first, the sky trembling at his call. Molthi steadied it, and the air echoed with thunder's ghost. With Mjolnir, they swore to defend what remained, to shape a new Midgard, not in the image of gods who ruled from above, but of men who lived close to the earth. They would not be kings, but guardians, and the hammer would strike not to destroy, but to build, to summon rain for crops, to shield life against storm and shadow. The children of Thor stood upon ash and saw the faint greening of the land. In their veins beat thunder's blood, but in their hearts stirred the gentleness of renewal. The storm had ended. The sons of thunder would ensure the world would rise again from the depths of hell where shadows reigned and silence ruled. A light stirred. It was not flame, not fire, not destruction, but the radiance of hope reborn. Baldur, the bright god, son of Odin and Frigg, stepped forth from the land of the dead. Long ago, his death had been the first wound of Ragnarök. Now, his return was the first balm of renewal. His presence was a dawn upon the ruined world. His hair shone like gold washed clean by rain. His face carried neither sorrow nor anger, only peace. Beside him came Höður, his blind brother who had been the hand of his death, guided by Baldur's forgiveness. Together, they walked into the light of the new age, shadows fleeing their steps. The mortals Lif and Lifthrasir beheld him and fell to their knees, awed not by his might, but by his gentleness. Magni and Molthi, sons of thunder, bowed their heads in respect, recognizing in Baldur not a warrior, but a leader of hearts. Baldra spoke, and his voice was like fresh water after drought. The age of gods who ruled through fire and steel is over. A new age begins, not of conquest, but of care. The scars of Ragnarök will heal, and from them shall grow wisdom. The world seemed to breathe again. Trees sprouted leaves from blackened soil. Rivers began to run clear where venom had choked them. Birds sang, timid but true, from branches reborn. The ashes of destruction became the soil of creation. Frigg, watching from the halls beyond, wept with joy as her son returned. Even the Norns, their loom shattered, paused to witness this moment, whispering that the circle had not ended, only turned. Baldra stretched out his hand to mortals and gods alike. He did not promise them eternal life nor freedom from sorrow. He promised them renewal, and in that promise, peace. The god of light had died, but he rose again to guide the dawn. The end had come, and from it a beginning when fire and flood had consumed the 9 realms. The world lay in ruin. Black soil, ash-filled skies, rivers of venom dried to crust, but even ruin can be washed clean. Out of the silence came waters, not of destruction, but of renewal. From the wounds of Yggdrasil, fresh streams poured. From mountains split by Surtur's sword, clear springs burst. From the clouds, long emptied of storm, rain fell, not in torrents of wrath, out in steady, healing drops. The earth drank, and its thirst was endless. The waters spread, carrying ash into rivers, rivers into seas. Poison was diluted, fire smothered, scars softened. The land, though broken, breathed again. Green shoots rose timidly along the banks. Fish swam once more, drawn by unseen instinct. Birds dipped their wings into streams that had forgotten purity. Upon the reborn waters walked the survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, their faces upturned to the rain, tears mingling with drops of sky. They cupped water in their hands, toasting life renewed. Nearby, Magni and Mothi raised Mjolnir, calling thunder not for war but for rain. Baldra, radiant, knelt at the shore and let the waves touch his palms, smiling as light reflected in the ripples. The cleansing waters carried away the stench of death. The corpses of giants and gods dissolved into soil, not forgotten, but transformed into the foundation of the new age. The rivers themselves sang softly, as though morning had turned to lullaby. Even the Norns, though their loom was broken, appeared at the edge of a spring. They washed their hands in its current, and for a moment smiled. Fate had ended, but from its ending new threads would grow, threads not yet woven. The waters continued to spread, until the land no longer looked like ruin, but like a canvas washed blank. Upon it, new life could be painted. Thus, the cleansing was complete. The world was ready to begin again. From the east, where shadows had lingered longest, a glow began to spread, not the harsh fire of Surtur's sword, nor the venomous glare of serpent or wolf, but the pure, gentle radiance of the first sunrise after Ragnarök. The sky, once choked with ash, cleared to pale blue. The first rays touched the horizon, painting ash and ruin with gold. Birds stirred in branches, their voices tentative but sweet. Flowers, long hidden, opened their faces to the warmth. The survivors watched in awe. Lif and Lifthrasir clasped hands, whispering prayers of gratitude. Their eyes reflected the dawn, and in them, Baldra saw the promise of generations yet unborn. Magni and Mothi stood together, Mjolnir resting between them, its runes glowing faintly in the rising sun. Baldra, radiant, stepped forward, his hair catching fire in the light, his smile unburdened. For the first time since his death, "This is the beginning," he said softly. Yet his words carried like thunder across the land. Not of gods ruling mortals, nor of mortals fearing gods, but of life renewed, balanced, and free. The dawn spread further, revealing streams glistening like silver veins, meadows sprouting from blackened earth, mountains emerging as if freshly born. The air carried the scent of soil, rain, and blossom, the fragrance of a newborn world. The halls of the old gods lay in ruin, but from their ashes, new homes would rise, simpler, gentler, closer to earth. Skalds would one day sing of the age of gods, but now the stories belong to mortals. As the sun lifted higher, the shadows fled. The memory of Ragnarök remained, etched into every stone and droplet water, but it was no longer terror, it was lesson. Even destruction could not end the cycle. It only turned the wheel to a new age. Baldr raised his arms to the light, his presence no longer bound by prophecy. He was not a god of doom, but of dawn. Around him, the world brightened. The 9 realms were gone as they had been, but in their place, a world reborn awaited its future. The dawn was not just light on the horizon. It was hope made flesh. The halls of Asgard lay in ash. Yet divinity is not bound to stone or spire. Out of the silence came the faint stirrings of renewed gods, not as conquerors of men, but as guardians beside them. Baldr, radiant as dawn, stood at the center of this rebirth. His return from hell was the sign that fate's wheel had turned. He carried no weapon, for his light was his shield, his forgiveness, his power. At his side walked Hother, his blind brother, once the instrument of Baldr's death, now the companion of his new life. Where once there had been sorrow between them, now there was reconciliation, a lesson etched into the heart of the new age. Beside them stood Magni and Mothi, sons of Thor, Mjolnir in their hands, not wielded as a hammer of war, but lifted as a tool of thunder, to call rain, to summon protection, to bless the soil. They laughed as their father had once laughed in joy of strength, but their strength now built rather than destroyed. From the remnants of the Vanir came whispers of renewal. Njord, god of sea and wind, had endured, his voice now calm as tides after storm. He promised balance for the waters that had drowned Midgard. Frigga, goddess of love and battle, endured as well. Her falcon cloak singed, but her heart unbroken. She vowed not to lead armies, but to guide hearts, ensuring that passion and courage would not be forgotten. This was no pantheon of thunder and conquest. It was gentler, smaller, but deeper. These reborn gods did not sit above mortals. They walked among them, sharing the burden of rebuilding, watching over without chains of fear. In this rebirth, the 9 realms did not return as before. The golden palaces of Asgard were gone, but gods remained, not as rulers of destiny, but as companions of survival. Thus was born the new pantheon, not crowned in glory, but humbled by ruin. And in that humility, they found a strength greater than before. When gods and mortals joined hands, the world began to heal. Though the 9 realms as they once were had perished, renewal took root in simpler, purer forms. Midgard rose first. Its drowned plains dried, its soil softened by the cleansing waters. Green spread where once was black ash. Forests sprouted with the vigor of spring, rivers ran silver, and the air carried the sweet fragrance of new blossoms. From the survival of Lif and Lifthrasir, humanity grew again, building homes of wood and stone, raising fires not of war, but of warmth. Asgard did not return as a city of golden halls. Instead, it became a high meadow beneath the sky, where gods and mortals could meet without walls between them. No throne loomed above, no barrier separated. It was a place of gathering, of council, of shared feasts in peace. Jotunheim, once the realm of hostile giants, softened. From its glaciers poured new streams, and where frost had reigned, moss and grass took root. The few giants who survived wandered not as foes, but as kin of a world, learning to live anew. Alfheim shone once more, its groves filled with light spirits that flitted between leaves, singing of rebirth. Svartalfheim's forges glowed again, not for weapons, but for tools, their smoke carrying promise rather than dread. Even Hell, long thought cursed, found renewal. Its gates remained, but no longer as prison. It became a quiet hall where the dead could rest without bitterness, tended by Hel herself, who remained, solemn but softened, now a keeper of memory rather than a jailer. The gods guided gently, but the world did not belong to them alone. Humanity thrived with its own strength, planting, building, storytelling. The scars of Ragnarök were not erased. They became reminders, etched into stone and sky, of what had been lost and what must never be forgotten. At night, when survivors gazed upward, new stars shimmered. They were not the same constellations that had guided the old world, but brighter, fresher, their patterns waiting to be named. Skalds would one day weave new tales into their light. The realms were renewed, not identical to the past, but reborn into balance. Fire tempered by water, life balanced by memory. Mortals walking beside gods, none above the other. It was a beginning, fragile yet radiant. The new world was young, its fields still damp with dew, its rivers fresh with the memory of cleansing rains. Mortals tilled the soil, raised their homes, and looked to the horizon, not with fear, but with hope. Yet even as life blossomed anew, the weight of the past lingered. For what is a world without memory? And so the first skalds were born. The poets, the singers, the storytellers. They gathered around fires under the reborn stars, voices carrying across meadows and forests, shaping remembrance into song, with harps strung from fresh sinew and drums carved from new oak. They told of what had been before. They sang of Odin, the Allfather, who gave his life to wisdom and courage, falling to Fenrir, so that his son might avenge him. They sang of Thor, god of thunder, who slew the serpent but perished in venom's grip, his sons carrying his hammer forward. They sang of Freyr, who fell bravely against Surtra, despite being unarmed, of Tyr, who kept his oath to the end, of Heimdall and Loki, bound forever in mutual destruction. Yet their songs did not end in despair. The skalders wove verses of Baldur's return, of the reconciliation with Huther, of the survival of mortals, of green sprouts rising from ash. They sang not only of doom, but of renewal, the great cycle where every death is seed for new life. The children gathered to listen, eyes wide as stars, hearts stirred by tales older than their blood. For though they had not seen the old gods, they carried their memory in song. In this way the immortals were not forgotten. They lived again in story. As the skalds sang, the gods themselves sometimes walked among them. Baldr listened with quiet joy, hearing his fate turned into hope. Magni and Mothi laughed at the songs of their father's thunder, raising Mjolnir to punctuate verses with lightning. Frigga wept as her bravery was sung, and Njord's voice joined in chorus when his seas were praised. Thus, song became the new shrine, memory the new temple. No towering halls, no golden walls, only voices and firelight carrying remembrance through the night. And so the songs of the skalds ensured that even in the new age, the echo of Ragnarök and the wisdom it carried would never fade. While skalds sang, others pondered. For Ragnarök was not only story, it was a lesson, and the keepers of that wisdom were the Norns, who once wove fate's threads at the roots of Yggdrasil. Though their loom lay burned, they endured. Walking quietly through the new world, mortals sought them out for guidance. They asked, why did the gods fall? Why must the world be broken to be made anew? And the Norns answered, not with certainty, but with riddles. Fate is a river, Erd whispered, and even gods cannot dam its course. Every end is a beginning, said Verdandi, for endings feed beginnings like soil feeds seed. Skuld, youngest, spoke softly. The thread is not gone, it is simply unwoven, waiting for new hands to weave. From their words, mortals and gods alike learned humility. No power is eternal, no glory without shadow. Even the greatest fall, yet from their fall comes wisdom. Baldur himself often sat with the Norns, listening. He no longer feared prophecy, for he understood its truth. It was not a chain, but a mirror, reflecting choices already made. Magni and Mothi learned that strength must serve life, not pride. Lif and Lifdrasir taught their children that survival is not given by gods, but earned through courage and care. The gods of the new age understood, too. Freyja tempered her fire with love. Njord balanced storm with calm. Hother found peace in walking beside his brother, rather than carrying guilt alone. Thus, the lessons of Ragnarok became the foundation of the new world: humility before fate, courage in struggle, and hope in renewal. The Norns did not return to their loom. They no longer bound lives in rigid thread. Instead, they walked among mortals, guiding, whispering, reminding. Fate was no longer a law written in stone, but a song sung by many voices, together. And so the new world did not fear fate. It respected it, learned from it, and lived with it. Though the world was renewed, not all was ease. The rivers ran clear, forests grew, and mortals flourished, but conflict remained as it always must. For without shadow, light has no meaning. The Norns spoke of it. Fate is not conquered. It is lived. Balance between order and chaos is the root of all. Mortals nodded, for they saw in their own hearts the truth. Envy beside love, anger beside courage. Even in peace, quarrels arose, but they no longer split the world. They shaped it. The gods themselves carried this lesson. Magni and Mothi argued often, their thunderous voices shaking valleys, yet their quarrels ended in laughter, their contests forging greater strength. Freyja still bore the fire of war in her heart, but she tempered it with compassion, teaching that passion and gentleness must walk side by side. Njord stirred storms at sea, reminding sailors of humility, yet always calmed the waves in time for safe return. Even Baldur, radiant and wise, admitted that shadows still clung to him. He had died once, betrayed by his own brother, yet he chose not to erase pain but to walk through it. Light does not banish shadow, he told mortals. It walks with it, and in their dance the world is whole. Thus the eternal struggle became not doom but rhythm, planting and harvest, storm and calm, love and grief. Gres, Ragnarök had taught that destruction is not the enemy of life, but its twin. From tension came growth, from endings came beginnings. Mortals sang of this balance around hearth fires. Skalds wove tales not of endless battle, but of enduring cycles. Struggle as part of being, not a curse, but a truth. Children grew with strength in their arms and peace in their hearts, taught that life is not free of conflict, but made meaningful by it. So the eternal struggle continued, not as Ragnarök's doom, but as life's heartbeat. Though new gods walked the earth and mortals thrived, the memory of the fallen did not vanish. Around fires, Skald sang not only of renewal, but of the heroes who had perished in Ragnarök. For remembrance itself is sacred, and the dead live on in story. They told of Odin, who sacrificed all for wisdom, who stood against Fenrir knowing his doom, yet faced it unflinching. His ravens still circled the skies, shadows reminding mortals to think, to question, to learn. They spoke of Thor, the thunderer, who battled Jörmungandr to the end, slaying the serpent, but falling to venom. In storms, Mortals swore they heard his laughter still, rolling with the thunder. They honored Tyr, who gave his hands to bind the wolf and his life to slay Garm. To warriors, he was courage itself, sacrifice made flesh. They remembered Freyr, who went weaponless to face Surtur, fearless though doomed. His sacrifice became a lesson. Love and courage outweigh fear of death. They sang of Heimdall, whose watch never faltered, who sounded Gjallarhorn to warn all, and who fell locked with Loki in their final struggle. His name became a blessing for guardians and sentinels. Even Loki was remembered, not only as betrayer, but as trickster whose cunning shaped fate itself. Mortals whispered his name with caution, for in him they saw the danger of pride and the inevitability of consequence. The fallen were not forgotten as conquerors, but as teachers. Their deeds, both triumphs and flaws, became lessons etched into story. Mortals carved runes of their names into stones, raised cairns upon hills, planted trees in memory. The new gods themselves honored them. Baldur spoke his father's name with reverence. Magni and Mothi lifted Mjolnir in memory of Thor. Freyja kept Freyr's tale alive in song. And when children asked why gods had fallen, their elders replied, "So we might learn. They lived great lives, but even greatness must pass. From their passing, we walk forward stronger." Thus the heroes lived on, not in flesh, but in memory, in story, in song. And perhaps that is the truest immortality. The world, once drowned and burned, now shimmered with a beauty untouched by memory. Meadows spread wide, green and fragrant. Rivers sang as they wound across fields, carrying silver light from the reborn sun. Forests whispered with the voices of new leaves, and mountains gleamed clean as if freshly born. This was the beginning of a new golden age. Not the grandeur of Asgard's golden spires, but the humble radiance of life. Renewed, mortals thrived, their villages simple but strong, their laughter rising like song across valleys. They planted seeds in the soil enriched by ash, and those seeds grew tall, heavy with grain. Children ran barefoot through wildflowers, their games echoing across the hills. They did not fear wolves or giants. They feared only forgetting the lessons of the past. The gods walked among them, not as rulers, but as kin. Baldur moved through meadows, his light blessing all it touched. Huther walked at his side, no longer shamed, but welcomed. Magni and Mothi built with their strength, shaping stone and wood for halls of learning and feasts. Freyja wove love into every hearth, her fire a beacon of courage and tenderness. Njord guided sailors, filling their nets with fish, tempering storm with calm. Even the scars of Ragnarök bore beauty. Where Jörmungandr's venom had spilled, new flowers bloomed, bright and strange. Where Fenrir's paws had torn earth, lakes glittered in the hollows. Where Surtur's fire had burned, fertile soil rose, rich and dark. Destruction had become seed. The skalds sang not only of old heroes, but of the beauty of the present age. They praised the harmony between gods and mortals, the laughter of children, the strength of fields heavy with harvest. Their songs were no longer dirges, but hymns of joy. This golden age was different from the last. It was not built on pride or conquest, but on humility, for all knew what had been lost, and all vowed not to repeat it. And so, the new world flourished, radiant not with untouchable glory, but with fragile, enduring peace, though peace now reigned. The memory of Ragnarök never faded. It was etched into every stone, every river, every story. It was the legacy left behind, the reminder that nothing, not even gods, can stand against the turning of fate. Mortals taught their children the stories, not to frighten them, but to guide them. The gods fell, they said, because even the mighty must answer to destiny. Yet from their fall, life was renewed. Remember this, power does not grant eternity. Only wisdom, love, and courage endure. Temples were not raised in towering splendor. Instead, cairns marked places of remembrance, where Odin had fallen, where Thor's last steps had thundered, where Tyr had stood unflinching, where Freyr had faced fire. Skalds carved their names into runes, and mortals placed offerings not of gold but of bread, milk, and song. The gods were remembered not as distant lords, but as ancestors, teachers, and companions. In story, even the fallen enemies were remembered. Fenrir, Jörmungandr, Surtra, Loki. All were spoken of not only as destroyers, but as parts of the cycle. Their wrath had burned, their venom had poisoned, yet from their destruction came renewal. Children learned that shadow is not to be denied, but understood. Baldur himself often told mortals Ragnarök was not the end. It was the turning of the circle. What fell gave root to what now grows. Do not fear endings. Fear forgetting their lessons. The Norns, who no longer wove fate but watched from afar, whispered to the winds. The thread is unbroken. It only changes hands. Their words were carried across valleys, reminding all that destiny was no longer a chain but a choice. Thus, Ragnarök lived on not as terror, but as wisdom. The world was not naive. It knew that cycles turn, that endings come, but it also knew that from every ending, there is a new dawn. The legacy of Ragnarök was not despair. It was hope born from ashes. It was the lesson that even gods fall, but life endures. The world was quiet, not with the silence of death, but with the hush of peace. Meadows swayed in gentle wind. Rivers sparkled with clear water. Forests rustled with life. Mortals laughed, gods walked among them, and skalds sang by firelight. Ragnarök had ended, and from its ashes had risen not despair, but renewal. Yet the Norns, eternal witnesses, stood apart, watching. Their loom lay broken, its threads scattered, but they smiled, for they knew a truth deeper than even prophecy. The circle is never broken, for every dawn must fade into dusk. Every flower withers, every river runs dry, every life comes to its end, but from that end new beginnings always rise. Odin had fallen, yet Baldur returned. Thor's hammer had fallen silent, yet Thunder's children laughed again. The world tree had burned, yet new roots stirred beneath the soil. Mortals, too, understood. They saw in their own lives the same rhythm, birth and death, joy and sorrow, sowing and harvest. They did not fear it, for they knew now that endings were not prisons. They were gates. Baldur, standing beneath the new sun, spoke softly. The circle does not bind us. It frees us. It teaches us that we are never lost, only changed. The gods of the old world gave their lives not in vain, for their fall has become our rise. Remember them, honor them, but live not in fear of their doom. Live in the joy of renewal. The people listened, and their hearts swelled. Children clapped their hands in wonder. Elders bowed their heads in reverence. Even the winds seemed to carry Baldur's words, threading them into the very air. And so the world moved forward, not chained by fate, but guided by memory and hope. The cycle of death and rebirth continued, as it always had, as it always would. For Ragnarök was not the end. It was the turning of the wheel, a breath in eternity's endless song. And the circle, eternal and unbroken, spun on. As you leave this story, carry its fire in your spirit. Let its lessons echo in your own life. That endings are not to be feared, but embraced, as the beginning of something new. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until the circle turns again, farewell, and may your own saga shine bright. Subscribe for more history, like and comment. If you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth. This is history, and it begins here